Good afternoon, subscribers. Welcome to an episode of a new series which we haven't entitled yet. So this is the maiden voyage. It's Oliver here in Sydney, and it's 5:42 p.m. on a Saturday. How are you, Peter?
Hi, Oliver. Yeah, I'm well. It's very excited actually to be talking with you about this particular issues because the thing that when I started to get into it, and what we're going to be doing is talking about 1984, and because there's this Facebook image going around that suggests that 1984 was not meant to be an instruction manual, and so just reading chapter one of 1984, and it's so bloody depressing. And then it kind of like, then you look at what's going on around us, and you can see, well, yes, there's a lot going on in 2017 that is not right, and so what's happening, and how does this connect to 1984, and where's this all taking us? Where's our society going? And so we can use 1984 as like a benchmark to be able to look at what's happening in the world, and look at also various aspects of human life, and in terms of politics and social mood and things like that, and see what we can come up with. I just find it really interesting.
Yeah, and it makes me right now. I just remember right now that there's I forgot his name, but we're gonna if I remember when I remember it, I'll put it in the comments. There's this. Is the guy who did the robotics for the Roomba? You know the robot that vacuums your house.
Yeah, yeah.
And then he's gone on to do other stuff now. He's actually Australian. He said that people tend to overestimate in the short run and underestimate in the long run.
That's so true, isn't it?
So
Yeah,
so I think when Orwell wrote this, he was overestimating that it will happen in 1984. But
yep,
then now that we're in the long run, we're underestimating that it's happening. The example he gave in that sentence was when when commercial airlines first started, people
yep,
went overboard. They over said, "Oh, we're gonna go to the moon. We're gonna colonize Mars." It never happened, or it hasn't happened yet. But then people underestimated the effect of globalization and what will happen if people can travel from one place to another. So that's all happening right now.
mm.
So that's
Uh,
that
one
phenomenon.
one classic example of that is the paperless office, which people have been talking about for for generations now, and it still hasn't happened. Unfortunately, it's yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay. Well, probably a good way to start is if we were to. There's a situation going down right now, which I think demands our attention, and we can kind of connect that to 1984, and that is the this paper that was written by an employee of Google,
yeah.
who was then subsequently sacked, and there's the sense of what's
Mm.
emerged from that. And so, how would you like to say we start there, and we can just let this progress and see what happens?
Yeah, and then we loop back to Orwell in 1984.
Yep, cool. Okay, so 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 basically, this memo that came out, this paper that came out inside Google was a paper talking about diversity, and in particular
Mm.
gender inequality that's occurring inside Google, and that this was an issue. And the general comments that have come out in response to this paper that was then leaked to the social media is that sort of the science behind what this guy was talking about is, for the most part, right, but a lot of people have jumped on the bandwagon and sort of, and because this went against the zeitgeist of the social mood of the company Google, he was subsequently fired because this was not the correct thinking to be expressing inside Google, and
Mm.
so is that a
Yeah.
good summary?
Yeah, like I have a long Facebook thread. I started a long Facebook thread on this,
Yeah.
and the reason I did it is I read the commentary and they went overboard. So I actually looked at the actual text, the full
Hmm.
text, And a lot of the commentary made by media, different forms of media, were saying things that weren't in the text at all.
Mm.
And even the title of many of the articles, they're calling it the anti-diversity memo, or as a screed, or it's a rant. It's a gross mischaracterization of the actual document.
Yeah.
First of all, it's not a rant. It was very well reasoned, and he showed both sides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And was it? And the whole point of the thing wasn't about biology at all. The whole point was about the echo chamber. He was just putting an additional view. He was very tentative. He didn't make conclusions. He was saying maybe it's also because of this.
Mm-hmm.
And people just, I can't believe how even some very intelligent people will just pick one sentence out of a 10-page document and then write like a whole heap of angry things. And about something that wasn't in the document. And the funny thing was, when it was leaked to Gizmodo removed all the links and the graph. There was a graph that clearly showed that he was talking about population distribution. So it wasn't about that science is saying that a woman is less of a coder than a man. It was never that. He specifically said that in the memo. And it's a statistics thing. Unfortunately, it's really so hard to understand the statistics. It's a bit like saying, on the average, men are taller than women, but that doesn't mean that there is no woman taller than a man. It's just saying that it's an average. That was the point with the biology, and it wasn't even about the biology. He was talking about preferences, like women prefer more relationships and people, and men prefer things. So it wasn't about innate ability. It was just a distribution of interests and preferences and traits. Yeah.
So do you feel like left-wing bias has come in, and so a level of political correctness has tried to smother this so-called rant, this paper, and sort of turn to be used for political purposes?
I don't even want to go there, because when I started this thread, it was really to look at arguments and their merits.
Mm-hmm.
And soon, I think within a few minutes of the thread, thrown words like neocons outright are being thrown. It's like people are quick to label. So
yeah.
I think from now on, whenever I do an opinion, I will refuse to be labeled by anything. I will take an argument on its merits and will not discount it just because it comes from whoever. You know what I mean?
Right.
I think what's happening is, as soon as something comes from Breitbart, the left will say it's all bad. And as soon as something comes from, let's say, Slate, the other side will automatically label it as bad. I think that's the problem.
Yeah.
People aren't really reading what's there, right?
Exactly. And so there's this tribal element that's coming into language and discussion that's essential for a healthy society to be able to function. That means that people are not looking at the arguments as you're suggesting, and so it just becomes politicized and angry and pathetic, to be quite honest, because it's stopping the evolution of a society and has long-term results that sort of hence the interest in talking about 1984.
And it's actually funny, right? Because I think they many of those can't really, like, I couldn't even categorize myself. Like, if I were to play by the tribal game, I'm like an Asian guy, half Filipino, half Vietnamese. So two countries who were both colonized by white men, right? Or the white, whatever they call it, what do they call it? The patriarchy or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, I thank the West for bringing the rule of law. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's like just because a good thing came from a society where men were dominant, white men were dominant at that time, because it's an accident of history, doesn't mean you have to oppose everything about it and throw away everything. And I'm really afraid of that, because I think that's what happened in history. Like when they had the revolution in China, the first thing that they did during the era was burn all the books. They
Yeah.
wanted to rewrite history because they thought history was bad.
Yeah.
And I'm really not in favor of that.
Yeah, well, that's been a function of every totalitarian state where
Yeah.
there's stepped in. Hitler, Italy during the time of the fascists, um, China, as you say, under Chairman Mao. So this is one of the points we're leading to with 1984, really. So I just have a quote here, actually, from a guy by the name of Leonard Reed.
Yeah.
Only the individual has combined powers of reason and self-control by which to refrain from doing to others that which he would not have done another done unto him. Such personal attention to responsibility tends to be lost when individuals are absorbed into special interest groups. These collectives have no perceptual power, none whatsoever.
Yeah.
And this is what's happening in our society in
Yeah.
2017. It's quite a tragedy, and this is this process seems to be taking over and becoming stronger and stronger, and no one knows where it's going because everyone's so focused on the here and now that, as you're going back to your earlier comments, that sort of they lose perspective of the long-term view. They have no perspective of the long-term view and the consequences of the immediate actions they're taking now. And that's very distressing, because one of the things I'm very interested in is that we're watching the demise of the liberal democratic tradition with the rule of law and everything, and the right to free speech that is inherent in that. And with that comes the sense of, well, okay, where is that going to take us? And unfortunately, the conclusion is into a totalitarian mind state. And if I can kick it off by quoting George Orwell in 1984, war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength.
Yeah.
And being the slogan of the state in which the principal character of 1984, Winston, exists.
And
so
I'm a bit hopeful though, because as I've been watching as in with this Google memo, I've been seeing people from both sides condemning what happened. So even Peter Singer has come out and saying, well, Google was wrong, you know?
Yeah.
So people who, and I think Nassim Taleb made a tweet. He said, I can feel something's cracked. So I think they were found out because the original document is in the internet, so people could see the original document and they themselves can compare the articles written about it. Plus, the guy who wrote it, James Damore, has been supported by people who with common sense, and he's been speaking out in media. And if you look at his video, he is far from the far right.
Yeah,
he's not one of those extremists. He's far from it. He's such a reasonable person that what's been written about him, you could just see, like you would have to delude yourself to think that this guy is an extremist, racist, whatever. He's just, I don't know. He's just like a guy trying to make sense of the world, you know?
So when you say that the comments are there indicating that something has cracked, do you mean like there's been a change in social mood where people are saying enough is enough? This is all ridiculous. This is just too extreme, too stupid, and there's a searching for middle ground now.
Yeah, some publications that have been publishing a lot of the feminist critique of the society, they're now actually publishing the other side. Like The Atlantic has published questioning questioning Google's CEO. Why did he fire the guy and just dismiss the argument without specifically saying which part of the argument did he cross? Because he's saying he crossed a code of conduct, but he didn't specify what. So it's like what? Which one? What did he cross? So they're starting to ask like basic questions that need
Yeah.
to be answered, right?
Yeah. Because another part of me is very interested in this Google diversity situation for just from a purely economic viewpoint, because economics is based on natural law, and so that sense of, well, there's the squabble and the argument that's going on, and then
Yeah.
underneath there's the economic reality of
Yeah.
the situation, and this guy who wrote the memo, I kind of figure that he wrote this with the best of intentions, and he was pointing out certain facts which have been already pointed out by scientists in the field of social psychology over and over again, many times, including the Guardian's even written about it and sort of
Yeah.
expressed a positive viewpoint about diversity. And so there's some conclusions that come from this article, which sort of I've kind of gleaned from my own readings, and I've taken this purely from an economic perspective. The fact is that there are differences in the propensity for people's interest in certain jobs and certain roles in life, and interests, and that sort of individuality is what drives humanity and drives society. It's a very important function of this. And so this particular situation tells us nothing useful about any individual, as individual variation is much greater than the propensity for generalizations here, which is basically what that article was doing in very broad terms.
Actually, I'll pull up the document. He actually talks about that, and it's I'll share it. So he actually said that. So
right, okay, yeah.
Let me just say, share the screen.
Yeah.
So this is the screen.
Yep.
This is the full document, and he actually said it here. He said, "Note, I'm not saying that all men differ from all women in the following ways, or that these differences are just. I'm simply stating that the distribution of preferences and abilities of men and women differ in part due to biological causes, and that these differences may explain why we don't see equal representation of women in tech and leadership. Many of these differences are small, and there's significant overlap between men and women. So you can't say anything about an individual given these population level distributions." So he has this graph. So he's not saying this one that it's binary. He's saying there's an overlap.
Yep.
And basically what he's saying, it's a long document, but in his too long to read, he's basically just saying that the differences in distributions of traits between men and women may in part explain why we don't have 50-50. And he's saying that it's extreme to say that all disparities in representation are due to oppression. And he said it's unfair, it's authoritarian to say that we should discriminate to correct oppression. That's all he's saying. So he's saying that it's unfair to say that just because it's not 50-50, it's because of oppression. Full stop. And I did get comments. I'll show you my thread that's been the long. I did comments saying that white men are oppressing women for centuries, full stop. And that's it. I'm just supposed to take that as fact.
Yeah, true.
And then that's the only reason. So he's just saying there could be other reason. And he's saying that to discriminate on the other way by like opening certain things just for women and excluding other people is unfair, and it actually divides the business. That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
And as you can see, he even outlines this is the left bias, this is the right bias. And he's saying both have their own strengths, like classical liberal, individualism, reason. And he actually links this to stuff. So when you click the links, he actually cites other people. So it's not a screed, it's not a rant. He actually thought about this for a long time.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a very well put together paper, actually.
So
I guess the main take out of all of this is that the implication of the paper and what he's suggesting is that companies that hire for certain specific talent may well find that their available hiring pool skews one way or the other, gender-wise, and and that's simply because different people are drawn to different skill sets and different opportunities, you know, and this is what leads to a skew in the workforce.
Yeah, and actually, and then some of the commentary that has been written, it's unscientific. It's just an unfounded opinion. So I'll share you to another one where some scientists actually studied. So there's this article from the Heterodox Academy. It's by so they actually it's by Jonathan Hyde and Sean Stevens. So they refer to the memo, and what they actually did is really looked at the whole what's out there, the scientific literature. So
I love the quotes from John Stuart Mill and Jonathan Haidt in both of those, because I don't know about you, but John Stuart Mill is one of my favorites, along with Adam Smith and a handful of others. So
yeah, so they highlighted in green those that are in favor, in red. So this is how you do it. You actually, so this is their conclusion. I think there's an interesting, in their conclusions, so they say on the third one, culture and context matter in complicated ways. Some gender differences have decreased over time as women have achieved greater equality, showing that these differences are responsive to changes in culture and environment. But the cross-national findings sometimes show paradoxical effects. Progress toward gender equality in rights and opportunities sometimes leads to larger gender differences in some traits and career choices. Nonetheless, it seems that actions taken by today's parents, teachers, politicians, and designers of tech products may increase the likelihood that girls will grow up to pursue careers in tech. And this is true whether or not biology plays a role in producing any popular differences. So their verdict is it's correct on population level distributions. Yeah, so he was right in sifting through the what's there.
Yeah.
And the things that he didn't say. So that's the scientists confirm it, and I would put more weight to their opinion, because these people, this is what they do all day. These are the social scientists, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So bringing this back to 1984.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I don't know whether you see the fit or not, but I definitely see that it's this sort of attack from extreme elements in society that sort of is creating this tyranny of thinking, tyranny of behavior, and it's a tyranny of the mind, in other words. And of course, 1984 is all about the tyranny of the mind, that sort of people have to live their lives according to a certain way. They go, is it once a week or once a month to a hate session, and where they build up this frenzy of hatred, and where the news is politically is controlled and manipulated to control the population. And this tyranny of the mind is and this sort of this sense of this collectivism mindset that is an absolute disaster. And here we see it in 2017 creeping into our liberal democratic way of life.
Yeah.
And there's this shutting down that's taking place. One of the ironies is that where this is spreading most quickly is through academic campuses and through universities. And why universities were all about freedom of expression, freedom of the mind to be able to explore and discover and debate and what have you. But it's from these institutions, these university institutions, that all of this is being shut down. And that's
in America.
What a tragedy.
Have you seen what's happening in YouTube?
The University of Berkeley and
all of that, and it's ridiculous. Like, you can't, if you're conservative, you can't. They won't even allow you to speak or to hold meetings. That's authoritarianism. And
absolutely.
And it kind of reminds. Have you read the Lucifer Principle? Like,
yes, very much so. Yeah. By Howard Bloom.
Yeah, Howard Bloom did touch on that. He said that the people who started the Mao revolution, they were the students. They were the students who dubbed on their parents because they believed in the communist ideology. They were the ones, and from my personal experience, the same was in the Philippines. Like there was this students who were taken, because I was a Marxist once, and then until I woke up 2 hours ago. And I mean, Marx himself, his writings, there's some really good things about it, but Marxism is quite different from what Marx wrote, really. So anyway, so I actually went. I was part of a rebellious theater group. We actually went to places where they were fighting between the rebels and the government. And then I actually spoke to people on the ground, and they said what happened was the students from the city came here to us in the village and told us all about, these are your rights. And then they militarized them. And then when violence erupted, they just fucked off back to the city, and they left the whole town devastated.
Yeah,
So they had no skin in the game, and then they destroyed the whole town because of an idealism. I think that's why idealism is so dangerous. These people's lives were destroyed, and people died because someone read a book and they think they should impose what their interpretation on real lives. That's a danger when people cease to think for themselves, I think.
There's that aspect. There's a couple of things that occurred to me then. I guess the one concept I like was put forward by the philosopher Isaac Berlin, where he talks about positive and negative freedom, and negative freedom being something that's imposed on people, and positive freedom is something that is innate inside yourself. It comes from, shall I use the spiritual word, samskaras perhaps, or a mindset, or when we look at positive liberty, this is what's happening in 2017, where this shutting down of freedom of thought and freedom of expression is coming through by being able to control the minds of people, basically. And whenever they go to express themselves, they get shut down. And this is how the Nazis, how the fascists of Italy, how the Stalin and the communist era in Russia, and Chairman Mao got to control their populations through this clamping down, this shutting down of the process. There was a very interesting guy who was a survivor of the German concentration camps, the Nazi concentration camps, by the name of Klemperer, and an Austrian economics professor by the name of Richard Eberling wrote about him, and how the Nazis were able to manipulate their minds by being able to control the language. And so, for example, in America, for example, the left wing has taken control of the word liberal. In traditional classical sense, liberalism is about this expression of freedom of speech, freedom of trade, freedom of ideas and movement of ideas and what have you. And so the left have come along and captured that, and so they control that word. And so everything that liberal stands for is this left wing sort of component. And that's the first step to being able to control a population. You control the language.
Yeah, and it's happening now. Like there are terms like microaggression, safe places, and all that.
Yep.
Which are nice words, but it's a bit like saying that, like in 1984, like the Minister of Love.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like saying, like in campuses, there are safe places, but it's not safe if you don't agree. It's actually not safe for you. This safe place is not safe for you if you don't subscribe to their ideals, which is ironic. It's safe for those who say follow. If you compare to 1984, it's safe for if you follow Big Brother's ideology, but it's not safe at all if you don't comply, or if you don't if you're not on board. And I actually listened to a podcast where Christopher Hitchens talked about Orwell. And so So chapter 1 begins, it was a bright cold day in April and the clocks were striking 13. And then he said that this may be a reference to the letter by John Adams about when America federated, and then it says that 13 clocks were, because there were 13 colonies there in America, and then he said the colonies had grown up under constitutions of government so different. There was so great variety of religions. They were composed of so many different nations. Their customs, manners, and habits had so little resemblance, and their intercourse had been so rare, and their knowledge of each other so imperfect, that to unite them in the same principles in theory and the same system of action was certainly a very difficult enterprise. The complete accomplishment of it in so short time and by such simple means was perhaps a singular example in the history of mankind. 13 clocks were made to strike together, a perfection of mechanism which no artist had ever before effected. So it could be a reference to the Federation.
You mean the Star Wars Federation?
No, the Federation of the U.S.
Sorry, I just had to clarify that.
and then he talked about the life of Orwell, and then he said that it was extraordinary that Orwell saw and opposed imperialism, fascism, and Stalinism in one person. And there was a moment where he was against fascism. He joined the civil war in Spain, and then people at that time thought that Stalin was this is utopia. We already have the answer against fascism, and it's Stalin, right? And so Orwell opposed that, and then the revolutionaries then got angry at Orwell because they're saying by opposing Stalin, you're being in favor of fascism, which he wasn't. Yeah. And I think it's the same thing with what's happening, let's say, with the Google thing, that opposing the means to X doesn't mean you're against X. So opposing the way they're trying to correct gender equality doesn't mean you're against gender equality. It's a fine distinction, but people get tripped around it all the time. Like, just because I disagree with the means by which a particular group is trying to emancipate or to be in favor of women doesn't mean I'm against women. But it seems so easy that people just fall for it all the time. You're opposing this, therefore you're against this.
I don't understand that myself, because for me it's blatantly clear that just because you oppose something doesn't make you the other. Yeah. And yet, as you say, people do fall for this dialectic all the time. And do people not think anymore? Do people not inquire? Do people not ask questions? It's you don't have to be that intelligent to actually take a step back and say, "Whoa, hold on a moment. Well, I disagree with that, or I agree with that, but I don't have to accept the alternative that's on offer." Please explain it. I find it devastating that people.
And that's actually how in the 1984 world, that's how the powers do it. They just create an enemy, and then they demonize that enemy, and then while everyone's worried about the enemy, they let go of their rights. So I think this. And then it's all about security. That's why this thing about security is also scary. I think it was Benjamin Franklin who said that don't be so ready to give up your liberty because of security. Because if you do, you'll end up with none of the both. You'll lose both.
That's right. Absolutely right. Yeah. It's and obviously 1984 is a state situation that's gone so far to the extreme that people have lost their liberty, their ability to think freely and to be spontaneous. And it's that level of individualism where people can think and express themselves freely. It's the foundation stone for human evolution, human success, human thriving. And it's got to be a celebration of diversity, which is sort of what comes back to John Stuart Mill, actually, that sense of sort of it's a celebration of the individual through being able to maximize their fulfillment in their life. And
Yeah, it's diversity in everything. Diversity in thought, diversity in gender, diversity in religion, whatever. Yeah, and yeah, Winston Smith like in the first chapter, you could see how he was so scared just to open a diary. That is, and you're always being watched every time, and it's happened before, right? Like in
well,
Stasi, Germany, and
exactly, and it's
yeah,
happening now because if you're in somewhere like New York or London,
yeah,
the cameras that are there watching you all the time. It's not so bad in lazy old Australia, but it's gradually getting worse and worse. The recent government's attempt to create some super agency that has control of all of the observation of activity in Australia is another ministry of truth that's in the formation.
and that's where the Google thing for me. That's why I like in a way I spent quite a time being involved in this. It's because simply because it's dangerous, because really Google has become a utility. That's how most people see the world, is when they do search. And the reason the reason like I trusted Google with my data, because I thought they were apolitical. Because from what I see, Sergey Brin and the actual founders were not politicized,
Yeah.
but now I'm actually afraid now, and I'm going to start to look for alternatives, because once you politicize this, and there have been some leaks, there's some articles I've been reading that other Google employees have been saying that they're now tweaking the search to get rid of things that don't comply with the agenda, so that it's labeled extremist views have been rooted out of search. They're not appearing in YouTube. So they do have a gatekeeping function, and the problem with this is this gatekeeping function is not transparent, because everyone's Google search is different.
Yeah.
So there's no way to know how someone's mind is being influenced.
Yeah.
And it's dangerous. Let's say the so-called social justice warriors took over the company, and the people who are just technology people who just want to do technology get fed up with all the politics, because they're not interested in that. They all leave, and then suddenly all this technology will be in the hands of a political class, and that's dangerous.
The thing I'd point out, though, in response to that, is that corporations are subject to the whims of the consumers, people who use their services. And if people become disenchanted with the corporation, then they can easily go somewhere else. Because let's face it, there's lots of different search engines people can use. May not be as good as Google for the moment, but by going and switching to a different search engine provider, then that company is going to get big and improve its capability and service and functionality. So we do have the choice. The choice does rest with us, that we can switch away from someone or a corporation that has become politically unacceptable.
Yeah, it's just hard for some people, because I know some people just accept the defaults in the same way that a lot of people during the mass media era just took for gospel what they see on TV and what they see on the paper.
Yep.
I know I was like that until I woke up and said, hang on, just because it's in the paper doesn't mean it's true.
Yep.
Like, I had to grow up and realize that. And I think a lot of people, like some of my friends, still tell me, like, you're doing this crazy diet, but the paper says it's bad. But I said, I'm experimenting on my own body, and I know what's happening in my own body. And are you saying that what someone wrote in the paper overrides my own experience. I just don't get it, right? Like,
Yeah.
I have empirical evidence firsthand, and a journalist's opinion on nutrition has more weight than my actual experience. It's quite bizarre how it can be insidious like that.
Yeah. And that's that divide that's happening between people. I think in chapter 1, George Orwell talks about how the only freedom you have is what happens inside 4 square inches, being the box of your mind.
Yeah.
To be able to think freely and to exercise your opinion, but you can't express that, of course. So it's trapped within those 4 square inches.
Yeah.
Which is pretty sad. It's
And then it's interesting that the world he portrayed here, like there was just one brand. It's all Victory Gin and Victory Mansion. And it's interesting how what he wrote really became part of it's like the meme. It's really became a meme, like Big Brother is watching you. It's just stayed with us, right? And I think when he originally wrote the novel, Big Brother was meant to be endearing. But now, because of how he wrote it, the meaning changed. It shows how the complexity of things is really a social phenomena, you know? So
very much so,
language is a
yeah.
social thing.
Yeah. And the foundation stones of human expression, I suppose. Yeah. So where do we take it from here? We're only just into chapter 1 and already we're depressed. So, to be quite honest, I think it's exciting and I would like to continue this actually.
Yeah. Do you just want to highlight things in chapter 1 that you really like?
The slogan, of course, bothers me a lot. War is peace, etc., etc. I've lost the...
Freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength.
That's it, yep. And
there's new speak. So he created a lot of memes in this novel.
Very much so, yep.
Yeah, so new speak, mini true, mini packs, mini love, mini plenty.
The alienation between parents and their children, which happens in I think that's actually the second chapter when he goes to help the neighbour with some plumbing, and her children sort of attack him, calling him a traitor, and firing catapults at him.
And I also like about this on page 19, I think, where he talked about the woman when during the 2 minutes of hate, and then so they were watching this thing on the screen that is calculated to make you hate, and then he said, suddenly by the sort of violent effort in which one wrenches one head away from the pillow in a nightmare, Winston succeeded in transferring his hatred from the face on the screen to the dark-haired girl behind him. Vivid, beautiful hallucinations flashed through his mind. He would flog her to death with a rubber truncheon. He would tie her naked to a stake and shoot her full of arrows like Saint Sebastian. He would ravish her and cut her throat at the moment of climax. Better than before, moreover, he realized why it was that he hated her. He hated her because she was young and pretty and sexless, because he wanted to go to bed with her and would never do so, because round her sweet supple waist, which seemed to ask you to encircle it with your warmth, there was only the odious scarlet scash, aggressive symbol of chastity. So it sees how hate becomes insidious and it affects every aspect of life, even love and sexuality. And it's just, it's a real dystopia, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And yet this is every time that someone stands up and becomes the leader, it's like they're presenting this utopian society. And I think Isaiah Berlin actually expresses that the greatest tool used by political leaders is some vision of utopia that is offered, and people subscribe to that. And particularly when there's hardship. And for example, the rise of Nazism came about because of the repatriation situation and the hyperinflation situation of the 1920s following World War I, and that set up an environment And so whenever you have a negative social and economic environment, there's fertile ground for someone to step forward and offer a utopian way forward that traps the
Yeah.
people's minds.
And also like the link. Have you been watching The Handmaid's Tale, the TV series based on
No.
the Margaret Atwood novel? It's I highly recommend it. It's like Winston Smith. This time it's a woman, and it's in America ruled by a theocracy where women were just simply used to repopulate the world by a religious theocracy.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of allusion to 1984 in the sense that in that TV series, it's all about signals between the people that, oh, do you know, are you part of the rebellion? Just like here where when Winston
has eye contact with that
O'Brien.
O'Brien, yeah, exactly.
And it's the same with The Handmaid's Tale when
Yeah.
the heroine of the series, she just has this look. They just had this look in its eyes, and then Winston also talked about sometimes you see the Brotherhood, which is the people against Big Brother, just leave scribble somewhere. And in Handmaid's Tale, there was a scribble in the closet of the handmaid that's before her. So it's the same that they have a way to communicate underneath the theocracy. And yeah, I highly recommend it. It's a well-made series, and it's the same. It deals with the same topics as 1984.
Yeah. Can you put a link at the end of this
Yeah,
below? Yeah.
I think
or
it's
just the name of the.
I think it's streaming on SBS now. It's
Of
Handmaid's
course.
Tale.
Yeah.
And it's also very good television. So I'll share it now so you could see the.
Cool. Yeah.
So this is it, The Handmaid's Tale.
Okay, I'll definitely look for that. Yep.
And the frightening thing with this Handmaid's Tale is it feels so real that I feel it can happen in America if we're not careful. And the premise is so good because, and I think in our spiritual studies, someone has commented on it. It's the premise is there's a problem with fertility in the future, and this is one of the reactions that happen because of that.
Right.
So yeah, so it's a possible near future, which is kind of scary actually.
Okay. So is this a good time to conclude?
Yeah.
And we can look to moving on to further chapters of 1984. And I think it's very powerful actually to be able to relate it to current experiences that we are observing in society. For example, the Google leaked documents, absolutely classic. And now I'm sure there's plenty of other opportunities for us to observe what's happening in society and compare it to 1984.
Yeah.
The hand manual to a totalitarian state.
It's not a manual, it's a warning.
Right, sorry. Okay. How to DIY.
How to avoid.
Exactly, yeah. Okay,
All right. Thank you.
Be well, yep, and look forward to following on.
Yeah. See
Take
you.
care.
Thank you
Cheers.
for everyone for listening, the subscribers.